All right, good evening, everyone, and welcome to this Ignatius Press Facebook Live interview with the author and composer Michael Kurek. I'm Thomas Jacoby, an editor at Ignatius Press in San Francisco. I'm in San Francisco, but I'm not at Ignatius Press. I'm at my home in another neighborhood. Michael Kurek has been composing classical, orchestral, and chamber music for many decades. Among the numerous prizes he has received for his work are the Charles Ives Prize and an Academy Award in Music from the American Academy of Arts and Letters. He graduated from the University of Michigan's doctoral program in composition, and just this year he retired from Vanderbilt University, where he had been a music professor since 1988. His 2017 album, The Sea Knows, from Navona Records, reached #1 on the Billboard Traditional Classical Music charts, and you can hear selections from this work, as well as many others, at michaelkurek.com. Michael also served on the Grammy Awards Classical Nominations Committee for several years. And Michael, finally, is the author of the book, The Sound of Beauty, a classical composer on music and the spiritual life, published in 2019 by Ignatius Press. Michael, thank you so much for joining us.
Hi, it's good to be here.
So before diving into the book itself, I'd like to talk a little bit about your background. So you've been a professional composer for many decades, and you've more or less given your life to music. This kind of commitment to an art form, even an art form that most people know on some level, and most people even love, I would say, might seem almost ridiculous to a lot of us. So my question is, what made you fall for music originally, so to speak? What were some of your earliest or most memorable experiences with music? Some of your deepest, how did music grab you?
I did love music, and even classical music, from a very young age, partly because my parents played it in the home, and they played rather user-friendly type music, like the Peer Gynt suite of Grieg, and things that kids would like. And we always had music playing. And I remember also, though, an early penchant for trying to make up my own music. And one of the things I mention in the book is hanging upside down on the swing set about age 4, just rocking back and forth and la-di-da, making up my own little tunes. And I think I was always just wired that way. And, music is one of the few professions left where people use the word vocation, other than religious vocations, of course. But outside of that, people don't use that word a lot. But I think music is a vocation in that you have not only a desire to do it, but a compulsion. It's not that I can compose music, but that I must compose music. I go crazy if I don't. The music is in my head and it has to come out, and it's driving me nuts until I write it down and expel it. And then more is there to replace it. And then, the vocation, a sign of a vocation is you have some natural ability to do it. And as I said, that's kind of how I was wired for music. So it's not just something you do, but it's who I am. And then finally, the vocation of music entails a kind of affirmation from others at some point that, yes, you have something to contribute to the culture. That one you don't always get, and there are some times when I just felt like I was the only person who believed in me, but eventually there were affirmations, and so I felt like, okay, I do have something to give to others.
Now, did your parents notice that you had a gift for music?
My late parents, rest in peace, both of them didn't necessarily. They had a lot of kids. I was one of 4 and the youngest. But I remember I had a paper route about 8 years old, and with my money, I bought a harmonica, and I brought it home, and I taught myself with the little booklet that came with it to play several melodies. And it's not easy to play. If you try to play a harmonica, it's not easy to play just one note on a harmonica. And I came in to my mother, and I'm playing the Yellow Rose of Texas or something. And Just like, oh, that's good. Bye bye. Go play. There wasn't much notice. Oh, this kid must have some talent. But I begged to be in the school band, and from that, I just, had the. And although my parents loved music, but it just didn't register that, that they had a real talent in their family.
No kidding. What was your first instrument, may I ask?
The drums. And I played percussion instruments, and I took piano lessons, but I played the percussion in the marching band, in the orchestra, in the jazz band, in the rock band, and so it just wasn't enough. I was hearing melodies, and so that drove me to the piano, and that drove me to learn to read music and to be able to write down the things I was hearing. So even from high school, I composed a couple of pieces for the high school band to play, and I did arrangements for the pep band for basketball games and things like that. And so, yeah, I was right in there. I mean, I knew what I wanted to do with the rest of my life at a very young age. And it's funny because I have college students, I have had, who are coming up on senior year, and they still weren't sure, what they were going to do. But I always knew, from about the sixth grade that I would be a musician in some capacity. And maybe from about 15 that I would be a composer.
Well, in a certain sense, you have a kind of a double vocation because you're not just a composer, but you've been a teacher for over 3 decades. And so, yeah, for many years, just until just this May, you were a beloved award-winning professor of music at Vanderbilt in Nashville. And I would say The Sound of Beauty has at the same time a kind of clarity, a simplicity, a depth, and even a sense of humor that seems like it must have been chiseled out over the course of many years in the classroom. I mean, it's sort of a pedagogical book. It starts from zero. It doesn't presuppose any sort of prior knowledge about music. It's speaking to someone who knows nothing formally about music, and seeks to bring the reader, to a degree of sophistication with music, spiritual sophistication even. That is,
And I
yeah.
had no desire to become an author per se. I'm an active composer, but I had been thinking of all these ideas that are in the book for decades, as you put it earlier, and they eventually coalesced into some form. I said, I've just got to write all of this down, and I wrote the book very quickly based on a lifetime of study and experience. But I think that you're right about teaching. In my experience, I've known many great musicians, and the greater the musician, the greater sense of duty they have and responsibility to pass on that knowledge to the next generation. I saw that very much in one of my own mentors, Leonard Bernstein, who's always teaching and always loving to share and teach with younger people. And I think this is because music is one of the few trades left. I mentioned that it's one of the few trades that uses the word vocation a lot, but it's one of the few that still is largely imparted to the next generation by oral tradition. Most things now you can learn in a book or in a class with an online curriculum. But let's say you're learning to play the piano and you have a piano teacher who studied piano in the 1970s with, let's say, if he was very lucky, the great pianist Arthur Rubinstein, who lived to be 95 and died in the 1980s. And his teacher had been a student of Franz Liszt, the composer. Liszt had been taught by Czerny, who was a student of Beethoven. and this teacher could show you, Rubinstein said Liszt did it this way and that Beethoven did it this way, and show you the fingerings for the interpretation of that passage, or the pedals on the piano that Chopin himself would have used. So, and all of this can't easily be put down in a book. So it's a real mentorship and kind of oral tradition. It's almost like a monastic tradition of pedagogy.
Now, Michael, so Why is music something that needs to be, on some level, studied and taught rather than just enjoyed? Why, for instance, does an ordinary layperson need to read your book? Why do we need this sort of formation in music to appreciate it?
Mm. Well, it helps to have to have a way to articulate something which is fundamentally beyond words. We grasp at words to explain music. Someone said that writing about music is like trying to dance about architecture. And words are inadequate, but I show in the book, I believe, how music works. What are these mysteries? Because it is a mysterious thing. It's invisible and it's in the air and it comes and goes and we don't know really what it is. But I've made, by making lots of spiritual analogies and other kinds of analogies to our experience and our way of perceiving the world. For example, I use you have a credit card or debit card that has 16 numbers on it, and they put them in groups of 4. And if they just ran them all together, we'd stumble all over ourselves trying to read those out to somebody on the phone or whatever, because seeing them in little chunks of 4, well, that's exactly like a phrase of music. We put things in chewable bites. So there's lots of analogies to language and to perception of the world that I bring out in the book that help us understand why music speaks to us.
I'm glad that you just mentioned a moment ago this sense that music is something ethereal. Music is invisible. It's something ethereal. It's in the air. We don't see it. It almost seems like it's magical to many of us.
Yeah.
But really, right out the gates in The Sound of Beauty, and this surprised me because you're a composer, I would think you would try to mystify music as much as possible. But no, you begin debunking myths about music. And for one, you insist that music is not magical or mystical, but it's a physical event. And this material reality of music, is something that can be felt with your body. This material reality goes hand in hand with one of the book's key concepts, I would say, which is immanence, which you contrast with transcendence. These two words go hand in hand: immanence and transcendence. Now, so Michael, what do you mean by the word immanence, and how is it crucial for your understanding of music?
Yeah, in theology there is excuse me, a dichotomy between, or a balance between, immanence and transcendence. Immanence is, and many of listeners know this already, of course, but for those who don't, immanence says that God is in everything and is everywhere. But if you had only that, you might end up with pantheism, that God is is one with the creation. But transcendence says no, God is outside, above, and separate also. He's in the creation, but he's also outside of it and made it and could unmake it, and he would still exist. And a human person, if you think about it, reflects that duality, because we are not only matter. We're not just a lump of cells. We have an immortal soul and a spirit with mind, will, and emotions, which will live on in transcendence of our lumps of cells, of our bodies. And so then progressing to music likewise is a lump of matter. Its cells being, its atoms or molecules of gas being shoved through the air in waves, and by a vibrating string or the vibrating speaker of a loudspeaker, and it reaches our eardrums, which vibrate sympathetically. But then someone takes their transcendent human imagination and their creativity, their God-given creativity. We're made in the image of God, the Creator, and we're wired to want to create too. And someone like a composer or performer takes those sound waves and forms them into shapes that seem to symbolize personality. By that I mean music can sound agitated, peaceful, can sound tender and loving. And so music seems to symbolize transcendence in that it is reflecting a higher personality. And so a disordered view of music then might be to think that music is a person. And you might end up with idolatry and gazing into this wonderful mirror and forgetting your obligations to other people, or even forgetting about God. But but if we have a rightly ordered thinking of music, we see that it is a wonderful symbol of God's immanence and transcendence ultimately. And so it gives us a sense of wonder and of praise, and doing it as someone who was created to do that by God within His blessing.
Yeah, you have a great term for music. You say that music is it's essentially a sculpture in sound, but not just any kind of sculpture. It's a dynamic sculpture, a dynamic form, meaning that it's a sculpture that moves and that develops and progresses. And this is kind of what sets music apart to you.
Right.
In a lot of ways, it's dynamic. But I wanted to move on. I wanted to ask a question about your average listener of music today. You say in the book at length that music communicates to us in a lot of different ways, you know, intellectually, emotionally, and even spiritually. And you explain why. You offer a lot of theories about why that I invite the listeners today to buy the book and read Michael's account of it at length. But you offer some very keen, colorful insights into the many different ways that people tend to listen to music, especially today. And some of them are a little problematic.
Mm-hmm.
Could you give us some examples of different kinds of listening?
Yeah, I mean, first thing that's obvious that comes to mind is people who cannot listen to music without multitasking. And they've got to be, reading a book or playing a video game, or some in some other way, or talking on the phone, or writing something. And that's great. I use music as background also sometimes. But there, at some point, if we can give it our full attention, then you're going to find out all that it has to offer, which is like uh, a wonderful boat ride through imagination and time, um, and a magical storytelling event. And but you have to really force yourself nowadays with all the distractions we have. A lot of people are what I call associative listeners. They can't hear something without being reminded of something else, like where they were when they first heard it, or maybe it was in a film music, and they think of the story of that, or it's a song with vocal lyrics and they're preoccupied by the words. But just talking about the music part alone, the instrumental part, um, if you can again get away from association and be free to let your imagination uh, run wild as you're listening, it, it's a wonderful experience. Then that we have analytical or critical listeners who are critiquing the performance or the performer, or what they're wearing, or their hair, or maybe they were a little flat on a note or sharp or something. Or they're analyzing the harmony if they've studied music. And that also is a distraction from just enjoying the music. And then we have, I'll give just a couple more. We have what I call social or brand listeners. People choose music in order to associate themselves with a certain cultural group or lifestyle. So we have, pickup truck music listeners, Mercedes music listeners, wine and cheese listeners, even Christian radio listeners who want to identify with the Christian culture. And even when that music isn't necessarily always the best, and in terms of just music. But and and then we have the problem of passive listeners, especially kids. The kids turn on YouTube, and whoever is paid to be on the front page of YouTube or Spotify playlist is what they'll hear, because they're being spoon-fed what to listen to. Or of course a radio station, you're listening to what they chose. And I encourage people to make their own playlist and pick out truly excellent, uplifting things, and especially parents to give children more and better choices that they just don't know about at their age. Take them to a Broadway show locally, take them to a symphony concert or the ballet, and let them hear lots of other kinds of music than what the world is giving them. So, and that would be what I'd call an active listener, someone who pays attention to the music itself and gives it their full attention, who picks it out for themselves and curates it for themselves. So it is an interesting thing to think about how we evaluate how do I listen? And do I ever really just listen to music? A lot of people know, nor do they listen to orchestral music unless it's in the background of a film. So people, what drives me crazy sometimes, people come up to me after a concert and they say, "Oh, that music you wrote should be in a movie." I'm like, no, it should be right where it was on the concert stage.
You have a line in your book. You say that for most people, music without singing is almost not music at all. It's
Yeah.
they almost can't think about instrumental music as music. And you make a pretty interesting point in one of the chapters of your book on, I think, how music communicates to the emotions. You say that music moves us largely because it's narrative. It tells a
Hmm.
story, even if there are no words. Music tells a story. It takes us. There's a narrative arc. There's a climax, and then there's a resolution. And
Yeah.
so connected with that, I want to ask a question about classical music itself. So when most of us think of music, just as we said, we think of vocal music. Maybe pop, rock, hip hop, or folk, or um,
Yeah.
anything. And you say that for most of us, like I said, music without singing is almost not music at all. But yet, this book, The Sound of Beauty, deliberately deals almost entirely with instrumental music, with one important exception in the back. There's a great virtue rating song sheet for the lyrics of songs that that your wife, I think, developed and is used in the classroom. It can help kids to discern the goodness or maybe misguidedness of certain pop songs, and there's a good example of a Taylor Swift song that gets analyzed and gets a decent rating, but anyway, but you deal more specifically with music actually in the Western classical tradition in this book.
Yeah.
And so, does classical music, as we think of it, have some kind of special quality or some power that sets it apart from other kinds? Is it somehow deeper than country or jazz, for example?
Well, yeah. I mean, who can say what is greater, the melody to Greensleeves, which is known as "What Child Is This," which was written in maybe the 1500s, simple, clear melody, or a Beethoven symphony. It's apples and oranges in a way. They're both great in their own way, and songs can be great, very much so. Um, and but classical music does have an advantage in a way that it's something like the difference between, for me, the difference between a poem and a novel, or a short story and a novel. A classical symphonic work is more like a novel because you have this, as you say, a long arc of a storyline. It's going somewhere, it's taking you on this journey, and this journey is reflective of, ultimately, I think, of our life story. Our lives are a story. We don't realize it because we're just taking one day at a time. Maybe when we're older, we look back at the story, of our life. But ultimately, it's a story with a goal toward heaven, and so it's goal directed or teleological. And music that has a goal that's moving toward that goal, and you can hear that and perceive it, is very powerful and compelling, just as a story itself. I mean, I'm a big fan of Tolkien and George MacDonald and the fairy tale genre, and I'm rereading the Lord of the Rings trilogy now, and it's massive. The three novels are hundreds of pages, and it's very challenging in a way to stay with it. But how rewarding it is, and it's the same with a piece of music that's narrative in nature. As I say, you're on a kind of a boat ride through your imagination that's just magical and wonderful. And so what I do is even I mean I've never outgrown it. I At night, if I can't sleep, instead of being a newsaholic, I try to put on headphones and listen to some great music, just some beautiful music, and just lie there in the dark and just listen to it. And it can be so encouraging and uplifting. The music of Brahms, like the symphonies of Brahms, leave you just thrilled by the end with hope and joy and glorious optimism. So yeah, it has a lot to offer. And so what I give in the book is they come to me after a talk or something and they say, I've always wanted to listen to classical music, but I don't know how to get into it or where to start. So in the book, in one of the appendices, I give a list of user-friendly pieces that everyone is guaranteed to love as a beginner in listening to classical music. And there's a kind of a playlist for you to listen to. So if you get that book, you'll get a little bit of some guidance in getting into classical music. So I think something people want. The names are hard to pronounce. You feel intimidated. In Europe, it's not like that. My pieces are played in Germany, and there's like families, there, and the kids come up to me at the end, and the same in Japan. I've had that experience. So, and here for some reason it's this hoity-toity thing with only adults, and oftentimes, and it gives an aura of elitism in some way that's not really necessary.
Well, on that point, I mean, your own history as a classical composer is actually a pretty dramatic story. And so you began as a critically acclaimed writer of, as you yourself, I think, would have put it in the book, kind of shrill, chaotic, atonal music, which is really the norm in academia in critically acclaimed classical music today. Then something happened to you, and you essentially risked your whole career to seek out beauty. And you tell this gripping story at length in the book, and I encourage all our watchers and listeners to buy the book and read Michael's pretty fantastic story. But so, generally speaking, we only have a few minutes here, but how has the way that you think about music developed over time?
Yeah, there's a great search to be original, and I was told that I had to be original and do something that no one had ever done, which might entail, breaking a piece of glass on the stage with a hammer and all sorts of radical kind of sound effects and things, and or music that sounds like a cat walking on the piano keys, as they say. And I recently, speaking of Tolkien, I came across this wonderful statement that he made that I think really answers this question in a lovely way. He says, "We are heirs of many generations of ancestors in the arts. In this inheritance, there may be a danger of boredom or anxiety to be original. But the true road of escape from such weariness is not to be found in the willfully misshapen, nor in the making all things dark or unremittingly violent, nor in fantastical complications. Before we reach such states, we need recovery. We should look at green again and be startled anew. We should meet the centaur and the dragon, and then perhaps suddenly behold anew sheep, dogs, and horses, and wolves. Fairy stories help us to make this recovery. In that sense, only a taste for them may make us or keep us childlike." And I make a distinction between childish and childlike. We want to be childlike, not childish, of course. But the way I put it in the book is that there's this quest to keep up with the times. And in this quest to keep up with the times, fashion has failed to keep up with the timeless, and thrown away the timeless in search of all these bizarre kinds of expressions, often which are dark and violent and overly complicated. So I think that's what it is. It's I mean, the man without God is searching and searching for something meaningful and original. And in the 20th century, it took that direction, and so did I. But eventually, my gift for writing melody is what, came back, and they said I couldn't do it. And I said, well, why not? And he said, because you'll be blackballed. And I said, well, then go ahead and blackball me, and I nearly was prevented from getting tenure, but I somehow managed to skim by. Yeah. So, yeah, I think that it was a journey, a spiritual journey that paralleled my journey into the church.
Well, Michael's music is absolutely beautiful. I encourage all our listeners to go to michaelkurek.com, michaelkurek.com. And a lot of his music is available for free there, all over the site. And my last question to you, the kind of departing question, is what are you working on now as a composer?
Okay. And if you'll allow me to just sneak in one point, which is there's a whole chapter on liturgical music. And in there, I make the essential point that the Mass is not a place to go to be entertained. We go to a concert if we want to be entertained. The music at Mass is to create an ambiance for you to put yourself in a disposition to receive Christ in his real presence in the Eucharist. As a Catholic, that's what the music at Mass is for, not entertainment. People say, oh, well, you've got to have pop music to keep the kids coming. Kids can understand if you explain to them, look, 1 hour give to God. You can do without being entertained. Then go put on the radio and be entertained. Knock yourself out. Okay, so what am I working on? I'm just finishing up a symphony, which is a 45-minute giant orchestral work. And I have a contract already with my record company to record it in March, if circumstances permit orchestras to be sitting at whatever distance and playing and recording again. And that's almost finished. And then I have a wonderful commission for a ballet. A professor at Notre Dame has a student, lost his daughter tragically, who was a great ballerina. And he wants to commission a full evening ballet in honor of her, and is looking for a choreographer with a Christian sensibility.
Wonderful.
So that's something else. And then I have a Broadway show in the works, because my wife is a Broadway show performer and begged me to write a show, which is not in my comfort zone, but I did it. And she's going to be singing in it in June here in Nashville. But we've had 2 readings in New York already. And so that's fun and just sort of on the side.
Fantastic. Well, Michael, it's been such an honor to finally talk to you after all these years of kind of corresponding through Ignatius Press.
Let me give you credit. This guy edited my book magnificently and took out all of the redundant words and things, dangling participles.
Man, this was such a fun book to work on, I have to say, and I grew so much from it. I'm kind of a pseudo musician, so it really, but I think it made me into a more real, at least appreciator of music. And I can't thank you enough for giving this book to the world. I think it really is kind of a treasure for the church right now, especially. And I do have to say, I have to make the plug, especially the chapters and the end about liturgical music, which I think are actually very crucial. Although we did have to skip over it largely in this interview.
Well, it's okay. Thanks.
But,
it's been wonderful. I've enjoyed it very much.
All right, everybody, farewell.
Bye-bye.